And on Tuesday, it baffled me that you would ask such flagrantly racist questions to this exceedingly well-qualified candidate. Your colleagues in the GOP promised a respectful and dignified hearing for Justice Jackson, and to me, you did not uphold this. So today I wanted to create a space where you might be able to challenge your own thinking, as prudent scholars often do.
Back to MAGA News Central. A Yale student stepped up to the microphone expecting to challenge Senator Ted Cruz. What happened next quickly became one of the most talked about political exchanges on campus. The student accused Cruz of asking what she described as flagrantly racist questions during the confirmation hearings for Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Many in the audience appeared ready for a confrontation, but instead of reacting with anger, Cruz responded with a lengthy defense of his record, his questioning during the hearings, and what he argued were double standards in how race and politics are discussed in America. For conservatives watching the exchange, it was a moment that perfectly captured a growing frustration with identity politics on college campuses. And by the end of the discussion, viewers across the political spectrum were debating who actually made the stronger argument. Let's break it down.
I wanted to take a moment to celebrate our newest addition to the Supreme Court of the U.S., who I know we've already talked about, Justice Jackson. Since you're here tonight, though, in the name of fostering intellectual diversity in academic spaces, it would appear to me that you already recognize the importance of new perspectives. And as a young woman, seeing Justice Jackson on the Supreme Court is invigorating, truly. And on Tuesday, it baffled me that you would ask such flagrantly racist questions to this exceedingly well-qualified candidate. Your colleagues in the GOP promised a respectful and dignified hearing for Justice Jackson, and to me, you did not uphold this. So today I wanted to create a space where you might be able to challenge your own thinking, as prudent scholars often do. So I'm here to ask you, what are two nice comments you can give about recent nominee Justice Jackson's judicial experience, besides from she has an easy smile?
Yeah, you racist. What's the comment? Well, let me start by thanking you for being here. And thank you for asking a substantive, important question. Thank you for engaging in a conversation. I think we all would be better off if we engage in substantive conversations. There's a lot to praise about Judge Jackson. She is very, very bright. She is very, very accomplished. She is very talented. She has an impressive and inspiring personal story. I will say, sitting listening to her opening remarks, where she described her personal story, she described her parents' journey, you had to be dead not to be inspired by that journey. And listen, I will say more broadly, if you look at the history of our country, if you look at the history of our country on race, it is absolutely inspiring to see an African-American woman serving on the Supreme Court. I will also point out that when it comes to issues of race, I think both the press and the modern left are hypocritical on this question. That they only define someone as black, or they only define someone as Hispanic, if they agree with them ideologically. So, Clarence Thomas has been on the court for decades. Clarence Thomas is a black man. The left hates him. They despise Clarence Thomas. And I'll tell you, by the way, the treatment of Clarence Thomas on the left is markedly different than, say, Antonin Scalia. Antonin Scalia was brilliant. He and Justice Thomas were every bit as conservative. And yet, the vitriol that was heaped on Clarence Thomas, nasty, racist language from the left. There was one magazine cover that showed Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom sitting at Scalia's feet. I think was racist and disgusting. And listen, I will say this as an Hispanic man. As an Hispanic man, Jorge Ramos went on television in Spanish and described me as a traitor to my race for daring. Okay, look, that says something about the view of the left, that they're telling you you have one way to view things and one way only. And if you don't, we'll demonize and attack you. So look, and by the way, in terms of having the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court, there was an opportunity for this to happen 20 years ago. There's a judge named Janice Rogers Brown. Janice Rogers Brown was a Supreme Court justice on the California Supreme Court. George W. Bush nominated Janice Rogers Brown to the D.C. Circuit. At the beginning of his presidency, he nominated Judge Brown to the D.C. Circuit. The Democrats filibustered Judge Brown. That filibuster was led by a guy named Joe Biden. It also included people like Chuck Schumer. It included Pat Leahy, included Dianne Feinstein. The reason they filibustered Judge Janice Rogers Brown is because she was a black woman, but she was also conservative, and they did not want her to go to the Supreme Court. And they succeeded in filibustering her. They delayed her nomination for a couple of years until it finally went through. She finally went to the D.C. Circuit. Now, everyone who was harumphing in the media that if you oppose an African-American woman who's a qualified judge, you're a racist, precisely 0 of them thought it was racist for Democrats, including Joe Biden, to filibuster Janice Rogers Brown. By the way, there was another nominee that Bush put forward, a guy named Miguel Estrada. Miguel is an incredibly qualified Supreme Court advocate. He was nominated to the D.C. Circuit as well. The Democrats filibustered him. If you read the memos that were leaked from Ted Kennedy's lawyers, here's what Ted Kennedy's lawyers said about Miguel Estrada. They said, "We must stop him, quote, because he is Hispanic." That's what Ted Kennedy's lawyers said in writing. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, if you oppose somebody because of their race, that is the definition of racist. And look, I'll point out in your question, you said that my questioning of Judge Jackson was you used the term racist. Listen, racism is a horrific evil in this country. It is also an insult that the left tosses around casually. I would welcome, if you look at the questions I asked Judge Jackson, every single question I asked her concerned her record. Either her record as a judge, sentencing defendants before her, or her record writing academic materials and law reviews, or her record giving speeches to law schools. All of that is the job of the Senate in the advice and consent process. And so respectfully, I could not disagree more deeply when you say it is racist to examine a judge based on their record. If the Democrats wanted to oppose Janice Rogers Brown because they oppose conservatives, you know, do you think the Democrats were all sexist when they voted party line against Amy Coney Barrett? I'm willing to bet you don't, because she's not a liberal woman. So you can't have it both ways, which is that when a Democratic nominee has a certain characteristic, anyone who opposes them is racist or sexist or what have you. But when a Republican nominee has those characteristics, it's open season and you can go after them full force, and the left is righteous in doing so. The standard should be the same, and I'm going to suggest what the standard should be, is we should examine people based on their actual record and whether and to what extent that record demonstrates they will defend the constitutional rights of all Americans. I think that's what people care about.
The exchange began when a student praised Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and described her appointment to the Supreme Court as inspiring. The student then turned directly to Senator Cruz and challenged his conduct during Jackson's confirmation hearings. She argued that his questioning had been inappropriate and accused him of failing to uphold what she viewed as a respectful confirmation process. The student then posed an unusual challenge. She asked Cruz to identify positive qualities about Justice Jackson and her judicial experience. The question immediately energized the crowd. Many audience members appeared to view the moment as an opportunity to put the senator on the defensive. But the response that followed took the conversation in a very different direction. Rather than becoming confrontational, Cruz began by thanking the student for asking what he described as a substantive question. He then openly praised Justice Jackson. Cruz described her as intelligent, accomplished, talented, and possessing an inspiring personal story. He specifically pointed to her family background and personal journey as reasons many Americans could find her story compelling. He also acknowledged the historic significance of an African-American woman serving on the Supreme Court. At that moment, some viewers expected the conversation to end there, but Cruz was only getting started, because after answering the student's question directly, he shifted to a much larger argument about race, politics, and what he sees as inconsistent standards in public discourse. Cruz argued that political discussions about race are often influenced by ideology. He pointed to Justice Clarence Thomas as an example. According to Cruz, Thomas has faced particularly harsh criticism from some political opponents despite being one of the most influential jurists in modern American history. The senator argued that conservatives who belong to minority groups are frequently judged differently than liberals who belong to those same groups. He also referenced his own experiences as a Hispanic conservative and suggested that some critics believe people from certain backgrounds should hold only certain political views. For many conservatives, this portion of the exchange represented the heart of Cruz's argument. The issue, in his view, was not race itself. The issue was whether political disagreement is increasingly being interpreted through the lens of race and identity. And that set up the most explosive part of his response. Cruz then pointed to past judicial nominations. He discussed Judge Janice Rogers Brown, a conservative black jurist whose nomination faced strong opposition from Democrats. He also referenced Miguel Estrada, a highly regarded attorney whose nomination became the subject of intense political battles. Cruz argued that opposition to these nominees demonstrated that confirmation fights have long been driven by ideology rather than race alone. His broader point was straightforward. If opposition to a nominee automatically proves racism or discrimination, then political leaders from both parties would be vulnerable to the same accusations throughout history. That argument drew significant attention because it directly challenged the premise of the student's criticism. And before we get to Cruz's final response, if you're enjoying this breakdown of major political debates and cultural flashpoints shaping America today, make sure to click the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the MAGA News Central community. Now let's get to the moment that generated the biggest reaction. In the closing portion of his response, Cruz rejected the accusation that questioning a judicial nominee's record should be considered racist. He argued that the Senate's constitutional role is to examine a nominee's decisions, writings, speeches, and legal philosophy. According to Cruz, every question he asked during the confirmation hearings focused on Justice Jackson's public record rather than her race. He maintained that elected officials should evaluate judges based on their qualifications, legal reasoning, and constitutional views. For supporters of Cruz, this was the strongest part of his response. They saw it as a defense of open debate and rigorous scrutiny during the confirmation process. Critics, however, continued to argue that some lines of questioning carried broader implications. The disagreement highlighted a larger debate taking place across the country. How should Americans discuss race, identity, and political disagreement in a way that allows for honest debate without immediately assuming bad intentions? That question remains at the center of many political conversations today. The exchange between Ted Cruz and the Yale student became far more than a simple question and answer session. It evolved into a debate about race, ideology, judicial confirmations, and the standards Americans use when evaluating public figures. Supporters of the student believed she was holding a powerful politician accountable. Supporters of Cruz believed he successfully challenged assumptions and defended his position with facts and historical examples. Regardless of where someone stands politically, the exchange sparked a conversation that continues to resonate well beyond the campus where it occurred. Now we want to hear from you. Did Ted Cruz successfully answer the student's criticism? Or do you believe the student's concerns were justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on MAGA News Central.